evening to the second leg of the India development debate. Now, after the Panama leaks, now Paradise Papers. Just as the Modi government is prepared to celebrate the first anniversary of note ban, data leaks by two offshore service providers, Apple by and Asia City Trust, have come as a huge blow to the centre. A joint probe by a team of an international consortium of journalists and a few media houses, including the Indian Express in India, has revealed the names of 714 Indian individuals and companies who allegedly stashed away big money abroad in a bid to evade tax. Prominent in the list are the names of Minister of State for Aviation Jayant Sinha, BJP Rajya Sabha MP R.K. Sinha, and former Finance Minister P Chidambaram's son Karti. Amitabh, Bachchan and Vijay Mallya are also the other prominent Indians in that list.
Indeed, it's all about the timing of the release perhaps. The report is released just 2 days ahead of the first anniversary of the note ban, which the Modi government wants to mark as the anti-black money day. Jayant Sinha has already clarified that every overseas transaction was bona fide and he has really nothing to hide. We at ET now vouched by the government's black money crackdown, but the Paradise Papers clearly raise some crucial questions. What is the objective of this data leak? And now, are overseas bank accounts aimed at tax evasion? And more importantly, will the Paradise Papers go the Panama leaks way with all smoke and no fire? The Paradise Papers is our other big debate on the India development debate this evening. I'm Supriya, Shrinate in New Delhi, and joining me in Mumbai is my colleague and co-anchor Sandeep Gurumurthi. For more details, let's take this across to an expert panel right here. We are joined by Ritu Sareen, Executive Editor of the Indian Express. We've got Daksha Bhakti, Executive Director at Ketan and Company. We've got Professor Arun Kumar, Center for Economic Studies and Planning at JNU. Hitesh Jain of the BJP and Prashant Bhushan, a lawyer and activist. Thanks each one of you for sparing time and being with us this evening. Ms. Sareen, I'm going to begin with you, and I think congratulations must come your way to be a part of this big exercise and this big expose. While it has indeed shaken up the system, and there's no denying that, with the number of press conferences and the kind of statements that have been made from politicians all across the spectrum, I think it has shaken up the system for sure. But let's talk about the impact right up front. A committee has been formed, yes, under the CBDT. This is going to be monitoring the situation. This will see where the expose has led, and will look at the perpetrators of this, so to say. This does sound very familiar. That's exactly what had happened in the Panama leaks, but did not really go to the stage of fruition, did not really lead to its obvious conclusion. Is this any different, though, the Paradise Papers versus the Panama Papers?
Yes, it does lead to a sense of deja vu. And as I was saying, we could have used the government's last statement. But what you must understand is that tax matters, and especially when they're involved foreign jurisdictions and countries, and do take time. You know, it's like peeling the layers of an onion. And the results, say, of the first investigation we had done in 2013 are now sort of accruing. And Panama Papers was 18 months ago, and in my last follow-up story I had written that the CBDT has already sent 5 cases for prosecution, and about 242 Indians are under probe. The problem with these tax investigations also is that nobody is obliged to tell you, to tell the media, to tell Parliament, or even if a status report has to be given to the Supreme Court, the names don't go, just the figures go. So it would be unfair to say that nothing has happened. And yes, this next one has come quite thick and fast, and we have a similar team being set up.
Mm-hmm. Hitesh Jain, comment on that. The Panama Papers threw up about 500 names, if I'm not wrong. How many FIRs have been filed? What is the action that has been taken? Why has the government dragged its feet when black money crackdown is supposedly so close to the agenda of the government and its topmost leadership?
Well, I do not think the government has dragged the feet. This issue was also raised before the Honorable Supreme Court. Someone had made a request that, the multi-agency group which has been constituted over here is not taking expeditious decision as it's required. But the Supreme Court observed, after looking at all the reports, that certainly actions have been taken. People are being probed. Multi-agency group is looking into coordinated investigation. And on that basis, the Supreme Court also felt that there is no need for SIT also. So all the details were placed before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is also seized of the matter, and the Supreme Court has appreciated the manner in which the multi-agency group is investigating. And as Ritu Sareen mentioned, if they themselves have taken 18 months to investigate just to put out the story in the newspaper, the agencies, the people who were the authors of the story has also taken years to look at the papers and then come to the conclusion before putting out the story. I'm sure you should give the benefit, you should appreciate that from that perspective. There are already prosecution cases have been filed in close to in more than 30 odd cases. The prosecution have been filed. The finance minister had made a statement on the floor of the house that close to 11,000 crore have been detected in the case of these violations, and the actions are being taken. So I think we should wait for the probe to conclude. And also the government has also made a announcement today that even the Paradise leak is concerned will be continued to be examined by the same multi-agency group that was constituted by the government for the speedier investigation.
Right. I mean, I think Prashant Bhushan wants to butt in, and I will let him come in and make his point there. And I think it's in counter to what you said. But I also want to clarify to everybody concerned here, putting out a newspaper report is not an easy business. You've got to do as much due diligence because you're liable to be sued. So anybody who believes that putting out a newspaper report or just standing in front of television and talking what you want to out of the throw of your hat, it's not easy business either. You've got to do your due diligence there as well. But Prashant Bhushan, come in on that. And the larger point that Hitesh Jain is making has to do with the fact that it took time for investigation by this consortium of journalists who collaborated internationally. So the government is also taking time. But if you actually look at the situation on the ground, the Panama paper threw up about 500 names. How many FIRs have been filed? I mean, in Pakistan, our neighbors, which doesn't talk about such great governance, a prime minister did lose his seat after all.
Yes, absolutely. You see, the proof of the pudding is ultimately in the eating. I mean, the government can go on saying that we are still investigating, we are still seeking information, we are in the process of filing some charge sheets, etc. But who has really been punished so far? How much of this black money or so-called black money has been recovered so far? And the answer would be a dismal next to nothing. Now, forget about these Panama papers which require, or the Paradise papers which the government says require investigation, etc. Let's talk about concrete cases. Now, in June 2014, I had sent very detailed and specific information about one company from Singapore which had sent 6,530 crores to 4 Mukesh Ambani companies, and another $750 million again from Singapore which had sent that money to 2 Anil Ambani companies. Now, the Singapore High Commission had written to the Government of India that, look, this is a nameplate company, but it is sending the largest FDI from Singapore. How is it possible? You please investigate this. Obviously, this is some laundered money, but apparently no action has been taken. The Department of Revenue Intelligence in May 2014 sent a very detailed 100-page show cause notices, 2 notices to Adani companies, 1 notice in 2015 to the SR group of companies regarding huge over-invoicing running into thousands of crores in the import of power equipment for the power plant.
Prashant Bhushan, if I could just interrupt you, we are aware of these cases and the points you've made very briefly, but I don't want us to deviate from the Paradise papers that have been brought into limelight today, and we will talk about some of these issues. But let me get in a quick word from Professor Arun Kumar, who is of course written and spoken a lot on the issue of black money. Professor Arun Kumar, to pick up the larger point that Prashant Bhushan was making was, there seems to be this little bit of political consensus on inaction when it comes to black money. And yes, the government needs to be complimented for going after black money in some form, but it's traders, it's a gold merchant here, it's the small fish, so to say. Do you see enough political will to go after the big fish in our political establishment across parties Do you see that? Because, as per your own estimates, 30% of our economy, you believe is black, which is about what, $700 billion could be the size of black money. This is not stashed in tijoris. This is not stashed under mattresses, as people like it to believe. This is probably stashed in these shell companies abroad. Is there political will to go after them?
Yeah, so as you say, my latest estimate is that the black economy size is now 62% of GDP, so which would be roughly about $1.4 trillion. But only 10% goes abroad, 90% stays in India, and of the 10% that goes abroad, roughly 30% comes back through round tripping, which is what I think Prashant Bhushan was mentioning. Now, the money that is generated at the low level, at the small, is very small. Actually, the big money, because we are talking about $1.4 trillion generated every year. So that is the big money which is sloshing around and of which a part goes abroad. But obviously, the political will is not there to tackle it, because it's the same politicians, the same bureaucrats, the businessmen who are using Hawala channels to transfer their money. So they have knowledge about how Hawala is used to transfer money abroad, how layering is done, how there are 90 tax havens through which the money is routed, and it's finally reaching some destination. So the names that have come out is only the tip of the iceberg, because 500 names is nothing compared to probably a few million Indians who have accounts abroad in the 90 tax havens that are there. What happens is that in the process of layering, you don't know whose money is going through where. So when the Paradise Papers come, then you only know those names where the money was directly sent to Paradise. Or when the Panama Papers come, then you only know the names of those whose names went directly to Panama. But if they transferred the money from Cayman Island or some other place, then their name would not be treated as an Indian name. And that's why you get very few names. So in other words, the knowledge that exists privately in the system, with the various agencies, with the politicians and so on, that doesn't become public. So the question is, private information has to become public, and the government should be more proactive, because the very people in the government who know how all these operations take place, because they themselves use many of these channels.
Okay, fair point indeed. And before I take it down to Ms. Daksha Bakshi, I'm going to come to you, Daksha, in just a minute from now. But I do want to ask Hitesh Jain this question. Is the problem the fact that politicians in general, I am not referring to the BJP and I'm not making any insinuations there, but politicians in general across party lines are backed by funding of these cronies? I mean, political funding in India is another topic and another, for another day of discussion. But the fact is, it's extremely opaque. It's not transparent at all. So until and unless you clean up election funding, you cannot really crack down on black money. I mean, it actually puts me to shame that in a list of doing business and gender and human development, we are in the hundreds. Here we rank number 19 in a list of 180 countries in terms, whatever crackdown you talk about adds up to very little. And it all boils down to election funding, it all boils down to political money after all. Hitesh Jain.
We have to look at what has happened in the last 6 to 8 months. So 72 prosecutions have already been filed in the Panama leak case. In the last 6 months, what has happened? The biggest crackdown the government has done on the shell money. Now, somebody mentioned about the 90% money in domestically is in the black money, and somebody gave that how about 10% is outside. So the biggest crackdown that has happened on the shell company, and when there is a crackdown on the shell company where the money is being used to laundered, that is, you're addressing a major root cause of the black money. So that step has been taken. Apart from that, the multi-agency group is taking actions, taking the steps and everything. Now, as far as the budget was concerned this year, it specifically focused on the purity of the election funding, the transparency to be introduced. Basically, earlier what used to happen, people used to deposit 20,000 rupees by way of cash. It addressed the issue of putting only 2,000 rupees. It also addressed as to what should be the ideal political funding and how the process will be taken care of. So, effectively, all these issues have been addressed in the budget. The government is taking proactive step, And if you will notice, the Prime Minister is being criticized, but the Prime Minister is being criticized by the likes of Prashant Bhushan or Congress for cracking down on the black money. So these people are all hypocrite people. I mean, at one end, when the Prime Minister takes the decision, these people are the first people who will cry, what about the hardship? They try to justify, oh, Indian money against the foreign money. Oh, this is how the demonetization has caused the hardship and all. Oh, what about the shell company? What about the hardship and all? So frankly speaking, if any person who has actually taken a legitimate stand, it is the Prime Minister who has taken a legitimate stand. In fact, just 2 days before in an election rally, he said that
you made your point. You made your point, and I'm going to come to Prashant Bhushan. But before that, let me get in Daksha Bakshi and get in a different view of a tax expert, so to say. Before I come back to the panel, Ritu, we've got questions on the substantive parts of this expose as well. We must not lose sight of that as well. But very quickly, which side of the debate are you on? Do you believe enough has been done as far as cracking down on these shell companies where allegedly a lot of money is stashed abroad, black money is stashed abroad? Do you believe enough has been done, or do you believe too much has been done, or do you believe too little has been done?
I believe that the government has been taking several steps over the past few years, starting with the black money law, which nobody ever thought would be implemented. It is implemented. A lot of people made declarations, and black money law was for the assets which are situated outside India. Not only that, in the income tax return of every individual, you are required to disclose any bank account in which you are a signatory, any trust that you have settled, any shares that you hold. So there is a lot of information that the government has required each and every individual and each and every company to disclose to the tax department. And tax department, I do believe, has a huge amount of data. So all the data that is being thrown or coming up by way of the Panama leaks or by way of Paradise Papers, etc., is going to be checked against the data that government already has in respect of all of these information that they have. In addition to that, the government also had income disclosure scheme where they asked the Indian residents to disclose their cash and pay a certain amount and come out clean. As tax advisors, we know that a lot of people did not want to take advantage of either the black money law or this, because they feared that once they do that, their past actions or past accounts or past records will be raked up. The other agencies like the Enforcement Directorate and all of them will go after them, and they needed complete immunity from those things. Now, that is not something the government is going to be able to give. What is
right?
Not only that, the government has entered into several tax information exchange agreements with several of these tax havens. The government has entered into the Common Reporting Standard agreement with it has signed, which means that as and when any account of an Indian resident is there is any activity in that from 2017, that activity will be reported to the income tax department here. So if you look at all the steps that the government is taking, one can say that the government is moving in the right direction. But I do agree and admit or accept that everything cannot be done in a hurry, or it cannot be. There is no magic wand to disclosing or unearthing.
I think there is. I think the impatience is on account of what the government had promised to crack down on black money.
In this country
One
for
second,
the last
I'll come back to you.
Last 70 years, it has been allowed to grow and grow and grow. No action has been taken.
Okay, I get your point. You made your point. I can't let you speak any further, but I'll take it across to Professor Arun Kumar, who I wanted to come in very quickly. I think you wanted to make a point there, because I want to take it to Ruti Sareen next on the exposes per se. Professor Arun Kumar, you had a point to make there?
So shell companies are used to circulate black income. They don't generate black income. They launder the incomes into black and white, So that's something we must be very careful about. Second is double taxation avoidance agreement is about your white income, not about your black income. It's about the declared income. So that's why we have had double taxation avoidance agreement since 1990, but not one name has come under that. I would also like to point out regarding big data analytics, which has been talked about. The Central Board of Direct Taxes chairperson in July 2016 had said, we have data on 90 lakh high value transactions and we will be able to catch people, but they weren't able to catch any people because big data analytics also requires a lot of investigative requirements. And we don't have such a large income tax department as to go after 18 lakh or 20 lakh or 90 lakh new people who are new filers, you know. So I'm very skeptical that we are going to be able to get very much. And if you look at the economic survey, it gives the data that there are only about 5 lakh new filers who have declared about 10,000 crores and only 3,500 crores of tax has been collected on that. That's a very tiny amount compared to the 93 lakh crores of the black economy. So in other words, much more political will is required. And simply taking steps is not good enough. Our laws on paper are very good, but as they are implemented, they are not very good. And that's why a lot of people generate black incomes and get away with that.
Okay, fair point. Okay, Ritu Sareen, coming to you now, because one has to look at the Paradise Papers in the context of the Panama Papers as well. And I think the one thing that both of them clearly reveal, and to quote Prashant Bhushan here, is that there is this huge business of siphoning out money from domestic jurisdictions to tax havens. You know, without getting into names, specifics, I think what both those investigations reveals is that that is a full-fledged business going on of siphoning out money from domestic jurisdiction to tax haven. Is that a fair assessment of the situation? Now you've scanned through, you know, scores of documents over the last 3 years, specifically to these two cases. Would that be a fair conclusion?
It's not scores, it's thousands of documents and of a very complex nature. And one point I'd like to make before I answer this question is that, sure, you know, while such exposés lift the veil of secrecy in one jurisdiction or one service provider, going back to the discussion that took place, there is also a veil of secrecy in the investigations. You know, my reservation as someone who has now been associated with 4 investigations with the ICIJ is that the pace of investigations in individual cases remains a secret. So depending on the political predilections of the government of the time, how do we know that the pace of cases, one set of cases is fast and one set of cases is slow? I mean, maybe there's a situation where the investigating agency or the CBDT or the you know, they can balance that out. So that is a huge danger in this. And of course, as you know, many of these are front companies where someone else is named and they are dummy directors, but it's actually owned by someone else. And that information could come in through the foreign offshore company from the jurisdiction or the government of that country. But there's a huge veil of secrecy around that also. So that this makes me a little you know, circumspect about the manner in which these cases are being investigated and will be investigated, because the tax department is not obliged to tell anyone. They're not going to tell Parliament, they're not going to tell the Supreme Court, they're not, and certainly not going to tell the journalists.
It's always tough to get information out of government officials, and kudos to journalists who do. But Prashant Bhushan, you know, one of the points that Ritu Sareen raises is very, very valid. How do you figure out the predilection or the manner of investigation that's ongoing? And if I may actually also ask you this question on setting up offshore entities isn't an illegal business. I mean, you know, people do that in terms of restructuring, that's not illegal. But do multinationals exploit this loophole to perhaps evade tax that they rightfully owe to the law and the jurisdiction of the land?
Well, firstly, why would anybody send money to tax havens if it was fully legal? I mean, the whole object is to hide that money. And this lady who was saying that the government has entered into double taxation agreements to get this information from foreign countries, etc. Why was the government not able to get information about, say, the information which came through the Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers, or that was sent to the government about that Liechtenstein bank or that HSBC bank, etc.? it's obvious that the government is not using the UN Convention Against Corruption to find out the accounts and assets held by Indians in foreign jurisdictions, particularly tax havens. Under the UN Convention Against Corruption, they would be obliged to provide this information, because most of these countries, including tax haven countries, have signed that convention. Secondly, coming to that political funding, somebody, this Hitesh whatever, said that that things have been made more transparent by way of political funding. In fact, they have been made totally opaque. See, 3 changes have been made, retrograde changes have been made on political funding. One was made in the finance bill last year, by which FCRA, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, was retrospectively amended to allow foreign companies to give donations to political parties through their Indian subsidiaries. Right. This was not allowed earlier at all. In fact, the whole object of FCRA was to keep out political parties from foreign funding. The 2 changes made this year are that now these companies, any company or any individual, can donate money to political parties through electoral bonds, right, where the name of the bondholder, electoral bondholder, would not be known to anybody, not even to the Election Commission. Right. It will only be known to the bank, to the public sector banks which are authorized to issue these bonds, which means only to the government and to nobody else. Secondly, they have said that they have removed the cap of 7.5% of the profits, right, for corporate funding to political parties. So now corporations, including foreign corporations, can give unlimited anonymous donations to political parties, even direct quid pro quo. Okay. So a contract is given, let's say, to a foreign company, and that company can give any amount of donations anonymously through these electoral bonds.
Okay, fair enough.
Now, the thing that was mentioned about reducing the limit of cash donations from 20,000 to 2,000 is meaningless, because today the political parties are not obliged to disclose who has given them cash funding. Whether it is 2,000 or even 2 rupees, it makes no difference. All that the party does is says that I have received 2,000 crores by way of cash donations under 2,000 rupees or under 20,000 rupees or under 2 rupees.
Okay, Prashant Bhushan, I'm going to interrupt you there. And
even
Hitesh
if you reduce it to 2 rupees.
Sure, okay, Prashant Bhushan, I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt you there. I'll let Hitesh counter you, but before I come to Hitesh, and a quick word to Daksha Bakshi on the point that Prashant started off by making, that these offshore entities by very design are illegal. Why would you set up an offshore entity, if not to evade taxes, says Prashant Bhushan. Daksha Bakshi, what's your counter to that?
All entities which are set up in tax havens are not necessarily illegal or set up for avoidance of taxes. Offshore entities have a lot of purposes to serve. Tax havens, as we call them, are tax havens in the sense that they don't tax the income in their own country. They also a lot of times do not exchange information with other countries. But that is not the only reason. The reason is that they have operations or investments in many jurisdictions. There are a lot of situations where you would otherwise have double taxation. So it is a part of, and that those double taxations are not resolved or avoided because of the agreements which are signed, because of the manner in which those are implemented and applied. So therefore, to say that any money that is gone to tax haven is something which is for avoidance of tax is a statement which is a completely tall statement without understanding the facts of how these companies or these operations take place. Another statement that someone made is about double taxation avoidance agreement. I was not referring to double taxation avoidance agreement. I was referring to tax information exchange information, and that is agreement, and that is something which is specifically entered into for exchanging tax information between the countries such as the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and India. All of these are tax havens, and they do not enter into double taxation avoidance agreement because there is no double tax to be avoided. So therefore, it is important to understand that these actions are taking place. The fact that taxes are getting eroded in certain other jurisdictions, I'm sure everyone has heard of base erosion and profit shift program. G20, that is India, was the leader of G20 who spearheaded BEPS, and BEPS has now come out with multilateral instrument to implement the 15 action points which have been agreed by all the countries in the OECD and the G20 to avoid this kind of a situation. I just want to make one point, and that is with regard to foreign institutional investors. Foreign institutional investors have been permitted by the previous governments, right, left and center, with participatory notes. It is there that the black money is coming in, and no action was ever taken against the participatory notes.
One second, Ms. Bakshi, I'm not going to let a tax expert make this political. The problem is I'm not going to let a tax expert make this political, because if it was so bad, why did the present government not change it? So I'm not going to get into that argument. But Hitesh Jain, I'm going to ask you the question on the functioning and the incompetence of the tax department, and that raises a lot of questions. Let me just quote some numbers. Hassan Ali did shoot to fame after he was served that whopping tax amount of 34,000 crore rupees in 2007. The ITAT brought it down to 3 crores in 2017 because the IT department failed to establish those claims. Now, there are two ways to look at it. Either we were incompetent then, or we are perhaps lax now. I mean, either way, this doesn't bring glory to the tax department. So how can anybody sit there and defend the tax department for the contrast in the numbers? 34,000 crore rupees versus 3 crore rupees now.
I will answer your question, but thank you, Daksha, for clarifying to Prashant Bhushan, because he lives in utopia and has this habit of tendency of making this half-baked statement. But this, to answer the question, I will come to a most important issue. So what has happened in the last 3 years to aid the tax department? So you have Jan Dhan Yojana, where every citizen has been encouraged to open a bank account. Then what you have seen, the biggest opposition that is happening by this hypocrite people, like including Prashant Bhushan and Congress and all, is linking the Aadhaar and PAN to the bank account number. The very purpose of linking, they are aware that once you link all this data, it will be easier for the tax department to see whether the how the finance and everything are floating. Ultimately, when in the country like India, where the tax department, you cannot increase the size of the, you cannot keep on adding the people in the tax department, but you have to be smart, you have to use the technology, you have to use the data analytics, and that is where the role of Aadhaar card and the PAN card comes in. For example, it helps you understand the flow of the transaction, it helps you to monitor the transaction, and it helps you to take the timely action. So this is precisely the opposition of the opposition, including Prashant Bhushan, is to prevent the government from detecting the black money.
Hitesh, I'm asking you a very direct question on the tax department. Why are you taking this debate to PAN and Aadhaar? I'm asking you a very direct question on the tax department.
Well, I think you are sitting in a judgment and asking me to give a subjective opinion, which we cannot, because the tax department is also doing its job.
I have given you the two figures, you compare them for me.
When you arm the tax department to take, well, it is not, see, figures do not tell the complete story. You have to see the action that has been taken by the government and the tax department to counter the compliance and the evasion of the black money. So you cannot, figure is one story, but you have to see whether you are sitting or you are taking an action. Fine, the figures are there, but the idea is that the tax department and the government is taking active steps to prevent, to attack the black money and to prevent the tax evasion. So you have to, the steps which Daksha listed out, the steps which I mentioned about Aadhaar card, PAN card, opening of the bank account, the last year the VDI scheme that was there, backed up by the demonetization scheme, the attack on the shell company. You have to look at the comprehensive step taken by the government to aid and support the tax department, and it shows the intent of the government as to what is the intent of the government on the black money.
Okay,
so you
fair
cannot
enough.
Look at the figures in one isolation. You have to look at the totality
Hitesh,
of all the steps.
Hitesh, and I understand your inability to answer on behalf of the tax department.
Clarify
I don't
on
think you've
that.
answered that specific question, but I have, I can't think of an answer that you could come up, and you are probably, not the right person to speak on behalf of the tax department. But let me take this to Ritu Sareen, because let's talk about one of the steps that the government has taken, which was in April 2017, Ritu Sareen, with effect from April 2017. The IT Act provides that if a place of effective management of a company is India, then the company will be seen as a resident of India. Because, this detailed investigation of yours has thrown light on this whole concept of these, what you call dummy directors in tax havens. Do you believe that this has, in a sense, attempted to put a full stop to this? This was going on, this corporate whale structure where you had, holding company and multiple layers of subsidiaries. Has this clarification by the government put a full stop to that, or is it still very ambiguous and is it still very rampant as your investigation is showing?
There are obviously no full stops, because even in the current investigation, some of the registry data that we have, from Malta for instance, we have seen that Indians have been incorporating companies, offshore companies, as recently as 2015 and 2016. Now 2016 was post HSBC, post Swiss leaks, post Liechtenstein, but even till 2016, mid 2016, the present Paradise Papers show that Indians have been registering offshore entities. So obviously there are no full stops. Also, just to come back to the story, we have in the Indian Express just done about 20% of what all we have planned for this investigation, and it's going to continue over the next several days. So you have to wait to see that, the impact of the story will only emerge after about 1 week, and of course there will still be stories that we haven't done yet and we will continue doing. For example, Panama Papers still yields stories. You get a lead, suddenly you find out someone was named. And what is important to note is that only we have the documents. The ICIJ will put out structured data, which is accessible to everyone.
Sure.
Today I got several calls from the tax department and tax officials. Data kahan hai? So, they are very eager to get their hands on the data, but that is only bare facts, structured data that will give you a name, address, and a passport number. The documents will remain with us. So you have to really wait to see the full impact of the story. It has only broken today, and you've just seen 20% of it.
I'm sure all of us are looking forward to seeing a lot more of that story as it unveils, and we'll keep our eyes and ears very close to the ground and keep reading all your reports, Ritu. But Professor Arun Kumar, if I may ask you, I don't think Hitesh got the spirit of my question there. And I'm not trying to point out any faults here, but the spirit of the question really is, where does the domain of the taxman end and where does tax terrorism begin? I mean, if the taxman were to go on an offensive, I'm sure everybody, including us in the media, will say there's tax terror in the country. So where do the two actually culminate? Can there be a consensus where tax terror doesn't happen and still there is an active tax department, or do you believe that that merger cannot happen, that meeting of minds is impossible? How do you demarcate between the two?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that if people are investigated, they'll immediately complain that there's tax terrorism and so on and so forth. So my argument is that, you see, the way our laws are implemented, that's where the problem is. There's a lot of crony capitalism around it. So those who are in power, they are able to influence it, and that's why others feel bad. So for instance, if you remember in the Hawala case, the Jain Hawala case, 52 names came out, and immediately these 52 people complained that there are a lot more other people whose names are not coming out. So in a sense, we need transparency. And I think that's the point Ritu was making, that's the point that Prashant Bhushan was making, that the transparency should be there so that everybody's clear that there's not going to be any witch hunting in it. Second point that's coming out of all this is that there's a global financial architecture that's responsible for it. It happens in the US, it happens in India, it's happening in Britain, it's happening with Putin, it's happening with Pakistan. So we need to look at the global financial architecture, and we have to make an attempt. It's not good enough to actually go after BEPS. Yes, of course, BEPS is, there are steps being taken by G20. India was a part of that. But there has to be much greater transparency within the country so that BEPS can be applied. I mean, for instance, Google, etc., are known to use Ireland, and the US government is trying to take steps against that. But in the Indian context, we don't know where our companies are going. Next point I want to make is that a lot of money goes out through Hawala. And Hawala houses are tracked by the intelligence agencies. So the question is, why is it that the intelligence agencies are not able to stop the Hawala houses from working? And I think again there's a lack of transparency in all this. Finally, I want to say that the stolen data is the way that information is coming. Information is not coming because the government is making an effort, the tax department is making the effort, etc. So stolen data has become very important. You see each of these cases, HSBC, LGT, the Liechtenstein disk, etc. They are all stolen data which has been or hacked data from Mossack Fonseca or this Paradise. So government has to be a lot more proactive to try and unearth this black money.
Okay, okay, fair enough. Daksha Bakshi, very quickly, 30 seconds to you. Do these papers fail to make the distinction between legal and illegal entities? Are all the names all those people whose names have been put out, are they all guilty of wrongdoing?
No, I would not accept that position, because as resident Indians also, we are permitted to open a bank account anywhere in the world within the parameters of FEMA, which is permitted to us. So we could be having a bank account, and we could be using the services of Appleby for doing certain activities, financial related activities, which we are permitted to do. And therefore, we would figure in their list. But that doesn't mean that we have done anything wrong. So therefore, to say that we figure, that the people figure in that list, they are all guilty of wrongdoing, would be extremely incorrect statement to make. Investigations must be made, and wrongdoers must be brought to book. That is for sure, but all of them are not wrongdoers.
Prashant Bhushan, you will agree with that? And I'll let you have the last word on the show so far. I mean, do you agree with this distinction that everybody who's been listed there is perhaps not a culprit, is perhaps not a wrongdoer? There has to be a distinction between legal and illegal activity. I mean, in one stroke, we can't paint everybody corrupt, can we?
I agree that not all of them necessarily. Yes, of course, not everybody, not everybody's money in these accounts, etc., would be necessarily corrupt money or money through over invoicing. It could be tax evaded money. It could even be legitimate money. But I am asking this question: why would anybody park legitimate money through shell companies and tax havens, etc.? If somebody has parked money through shell companies and tax havens, then there must be some illegality or illegitimacy to that, because he is wanting to hide that money.
Hitesh Jain, Prashant Bhushan, Professor Arun Kumar, Daksha Bakshi and Ritu Sareen, thank you very, very much for joining us on this edition of the India Development Debate. A debate on black money and a crackdown there is a never-ending one. But thanks very much for sparing your thoughts this evening with us at TT Now.
Intent alone is not enough to win the war against black money. The government needs to show greater will to bring back black money stashed abroad.
Now, this can and must be done without creating an adversarial tax climate. The people of this country will, of course, judge come 2019. Thanks very much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate.